I'm Bobby Lauer. I'm the president of Campus Compact. Thanks for being with us today. This is our first of what will become regular federal policy briefings. This is a part of an enhanced federal agenda that Campus Compact is launching to really elevate and make stronger our voice in Washington, in particular, as we advocate for resources, policies, programs, and attention on the civic and community engagement mission of higher education. I am very excited to be joined by two partners and colleagues and friends as we know that we can't do this work alone, and that if we were serious about this work at Campus Compact, it was going to take getting some experts on the team. So over the summer, in collaboration with our board, we spent some time looking at potential partners and are thrilled to have welcomed Washington Navigators to the Compact team, who are working with us holistically around thinking around our work in DC, how we elevate our work, they're getting to know community and civic engagement really well, but I'm going to ask them when they kick off to also just provide an introduction of the work that they have done prior to their new firm, Washington Navigators, to give you a sense of the depth of experience that they're bringing to this work. And otherwise, I'm going to get out of the way. So thank you for being with us today. And I'm excited to welcome Scott Suddeth and Bill Bates up. So I'm going to add their spotlights and remove mine and turn it over to them.
Thank you, Bobby. Scott here. He's Bill. One direction or the other.
Hey, everybody.
This is the, we are excited to bring you the Scott and Bill show from Washington, D.C. We hope to do this on a regular basis. We can't promise that we'll always have breaking news, but today we may just have breaking news. Tomorrow it will probably be old news, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get to that in a minute. Bill and I are excited to be partnering with Campus Compact to focus on the federal agenda and federal issues of concern to you and your jobs at the institutions you work for. A little bit about us. I'm no stranger to higher education. I've worked perhaps with many of you on this call. Both Bill and I suffer from being former congressional staffers, both in the Senate and House. And then I've spent the last 30 years representing institutions of higher education in Washington, D.C., including the University of California system, the University of Chicago, which, like many institutions, had very active community and civic engagement, the University of Texas system, and the Texas A&M University system. So worked with a lot of your colleagues in governmental relations over the years, which is something that we will get back to in a moment. But there's almost every aspect of higher education, from research funding to higher ed policy, to student engagement, student learning, to a lot of the political issues that particularly public universities find themselves sucked into from time to time at the national and state level. We have a few battle scars from those as well. I'll let my colleague Bill speak briefly about his background and experience as well.
Thanks, Scott, and hello to everybody. Good afternoon. As Scott mentioned, we've been working together for a couple decades as partners in Washington Navigators now for a few years. But prior to that, I was an executive vice president with an organization called the Council on Competitiveness here in Washington, which was a group of CEOs, university leaders, labor leaders, and national lab directors focused on policies to enhance U.S. global competitiveness. I still continue in an advisory role with that group, but prior to that, I had lobbied for the telecommunications industry, for a variety of clients with a large public affairs firm, and yes, worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years for a member from Silicon Valley. So excited to be engaged with Campus Compact, with the broader network that Compact represents. And I guess the last thing I would just say is opening comments is, as Bobby said, this is sort of a new thing we're doing here today. We're going to try to host these policy legislative briefings, I think about once a quarter, or as circumstances demand. But we welcome your feedback as we go through this process. And if there are areas that you'd really like to know more about or focus on, we're happy to take that into consideration and take a look at it. Scott and I have spent a lot of time in and around DC. So even this week is kind of a unique and interesting time to be working here. So the timing of this briefing itself is quite fortuitous. And with that, I'll turn it back to Scott to close out some opening comments.
Thank you, Bill. I might just add, just in terms of some of my own passions, I spent 12 years as an elected member of the school board. So I've spent a lot of time in the K through 12 space, which I know is very important to community and civic engagement for many of the folks on the phone. I'm also a proud alumnus of the Federal Work Study Program. It's actually how I ended up in Washington. I had a college work study a job off campus as an undergrad, and it led me to my first job on Capitol Hill. So I love working with groups that care and advocate for that program, which we will talk about as we go along here. So, Bill, let's continue.
All right, so the top title of this presentation was Handicapping the Endgame on the FY24 Budget and its Impact on Community and Civic Engagement. And the timing of this discussion, as I said, is really interesting because as we speak, the House of Representatives is without a speaker, with the former speaker, Kevin McCarthy, having been voted out by his colleagues last week. As of 2 minutes ago, a decision was made that they will not be voting on his replacement today, but they did nominate Steve Scalise, who was the majority leader, the number 2 position in the House of Representatives, as their nominee. The question now is, does he have the 217 votes that he needs in order to secure the speakership? And those of you that follow politics closely may recall that last year or earlier this year, it took about 15 votes to get Speaker McCarthy elected. And I think the Republican Party is very much hoping for not a repeat of that activity. But at this point in time, it does not look like there's an obvious path to 217 for Representative Scalise or anyone else. So I expect we'll have a couple more days of backroom conversations and discussions. And the reason I'm spending any time at all on this topic, aside from it just being kind of a fascinating political junkie moment, is that it's very unclear that the House can actually move any legislation while this is up in the air. And specific to our topic today of getting the FY24 appropriations bills, the spending bills, the final budget figured out, we are in limbo right now. And we are under a continuing resolution, which is keeping the government open. But there is no guarantee that will last till mid-November, and there's no guarantee as to what's going to happen after that. So for those of us that would like to see things happen in the budget and in legislation over the next few weeks, it would be great for the Republican Party to get this issue on your screen resolved as quickly as possible. Go ahead,
Bill,
Scott.
Well, before you move on, let's go back to that slide for a moment, because Bill and I actually had a debate before we got on this call. Since Scalise had already been nominated, do we even leave these other names up there? But to Bill's point, you need 217 votes on the House floor to be elected speaker currently. And in the private Republican caucus vote today, it was by secret ballot, but I guess they did disclose the final tally. He got 113 votes. So he's still more than he's 99 votes shy, or no, he's actually more than that, shy of the 217 that he needs on the floor. So the question becomes, Does Jordan endorse him? Jordan's got 99 votes himself. So do his followers decide to, go another round? There were 9 Republicans who didn't vote. So, who are they going to support? So there is still very much up in the air. Now, those of us who've, as you've already heard way too many times, we've been here a while. The vote in favor of Scalise, at least at this juncture, and certainly we'll see what happens tomorrow and perhaps later in the week, is arguably a vote for the institution, a vote for trying to respect some of the institutional protocols. Scalise is the current number 2, the majority leader. That would be the typical line of succession in the House. And so hopefully that would, if this plays out, that would lend some credence to your next slide, Bill.
Which I'm going to get to, but because we're providing, I hope, some fascinating cocktail fodder for people. The one thing I will point out here is that the current temporary speaker is Patrick McHenry from North Carolina. Interim, I guess, is the official title. He is only in this position because post 9/11, Congress came up with a plan to ensure there would be a succession in place in case of disaster. If the speaker became incapacitated or there was some sort of an attack. So there is actually a list created by the current Speaker of the House to say, if in the event of emergency, my speakership ends for whatever reason, here's 3 people that could take over. And Patrick McHenry was the first person on that list, which is why he is currently the interim speaker. There is quite a bit of debate right now as to what power he actually has, that ranges from none to he can just operate as though he were the full speaker until the conference elects somebody new. Because there's no agreement on that, we're continuing, and again, as I said before, in this sort of state of limbo right now. Which gets me to my next point, which is, so where do we go from here? What are we thinking is likely to happen? As I mentioned, the continuing resolution that was a 45-day short-term resolution that is keeping our government open and funded ends on November 17th. Again, that is at the prior year's funding level. So FY23. So if you were happy with your funding last year, that's fine. But again, as of the 18th of November, if something else does not get resolved, we're back into the discussion of, is the government going to shut down? What deal needs to be cut in order for that to happen? There are some pressure points, and that's what I wanted to just highlight here in these next 2 bullets, which is, well, the continuing resolution may have cost Speaker McCarthy his job. It did not, in fact, include any funding for the ongoing war in Ukraine, which is something the administration very much wants to see happen. And I would probably more than a majority in the House and the Senate would like to see happen. However, there is a strident minority that is opposing that. But that is something that many people want to see get done, and sooner rather than later. And now, since we, even first put this slide together, had to add a 3rd bullet here with the ongoing, war in Israel and Gaza. There is a tremendous amount of momentum for everything from resolutions of support to providing some emergency funding to Israel to support their efforts over there. Again, these are pressure points that are positives only in the sense that it may force Congress towards activity. Certainly don't want to imply that war is a positive thing in other ways. We'll see what happens, but there's as we'll sort of close in a few minutes here. How this ends is anyone's guess right now, but this is sort of the state of play of where things are in the big picture. I think what we want to turn to now is to look specifically at the House and Senate efforts on their specific appropriations bills, which fund the specific agencies of the federal government. And I'll turn it back to Scott for that.
Yeah. So, we're in this situation of having to have continuing resolutions because, as you know, the the fiscal year ended at the end of September and the new year began. But Congress, as has been the case for most of the last 15 years or so, has not passed its appropriations bills on time. And that is actually at the heart of some of the agitation between a small but strident group of House members that cost Speaker McCarthy his leadership. So the House has passed 4 of 12 appropriations bills. Of the ones that have not yet made it to the floor, in some cases haven't even made it out of committee, and in most cases probably will not, include what is generally annually considered the most controversial appropriations bill, the labor HHS education bill, which is where many of the programs that we care about reside. It's not usually controversial because of your issues, but it is controversial because of the second title of the committee, HHS, Health and Human Services, which includes language related to reproductive health care, language related to abortion, and always there are efforts to bring amendments onto the floor to that bill that weigh it down, particularly in the House, sometimes in the Senate, and to a lesser degree on sometimes conflict between the House and the administration on labor issues. We often get caught up in that political strife, but we mostly get caught up in the distribution of the amount of money that goes to that subcommittee and how it gets divided up in that subcommittee. And education always gets the leftovers. And that, to a degree, is where we are today, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this is where we are in the House. So you've got 4 bills that have passed. You've got these remaining big bills that will probably end up in some variety of soup or stew that we will call a continuing resolution or an omnibus, because the Senate, while they have passed 12 bills out of committee, they haven't passed any on the floor. But the very important distinction, which we will get into with a little more granular here in a moment, is that you'll remember back when we were worried about this debt limit, and we had to negotiate raising the debt limit. Well, the Speaker extracted some compromise out of the administration, and that compromise was, we were going to reduce overall spending a little bit. The Senate marked up its bills to that agreement. So the Senate bills all reflect this sort of chamber executive branch compromise. The House decided to ignore what they had agreed to through their leadership and marked up bills that cut programs much further than anyone had agreed to. College works, federal work study being one example. So that's where we stand. And now the challenge will be the end game.
Yeah, so this is a little prognosticating here. There's a variety of paths that the Congress could take to get themselves out of the mess they've created. We've mentioned a couple of them already. One possibility is that the speakers vote for the new speaker takes longer than they hope. They just, basically are unable to move legislation while that's going on. So we see another short-term continuing resolution. Big question mark there is, is it just at FY23, last year's levels, or is there a push to do an across-the-board cut of some nature? Senate probably wouldn't go along with that, but again, that's creates some tension there. I could see, honestly, a scenario that takes us to January on these sorts of short-term continuing resolutions, because there's such a disparity between where the House and the Senate are right now. And that was before any of these issues related to the speakership reared its ugly head. Could we end up with another omnibus like we did last year that just wraps basically 12 bills, or 8 or 9 of the bills into one gigantic bill? I think we could. Again, that is something that a very vocal group, particularly on the Republican side, swore they would never do again. And there were promises from leadership, of which Steve Scalise, the presumptive next speaker, were a part of. So, but if you don't do that, then you end up at number 3, which is basically bring one bill up at a time in the House, debate it, allow amendments, pass it or don't pass it. Now that still gets you into a discussion with the Senate that's going to pass that has a group of bills at a completely different level, but maybe that is a way to get through the House challenge of having promised some regular order on those bills. The only way I see that happening is, again, if we have another continuing resolution that pushes the deadline farther into the end of this year or early next year, because there just really aren't that many legislative days left. It's not out of the realm of possibility, as number 4 highlights there, that we could still see a shutdown. There's a lot of ways that, problems come up with 1, 2, and 3 there that results in them just simply not being able to cut a deal, or that enough members on either the House or Senate decide it's somehow in their interest to force a shutdown of, a day, a 2, or a week. Which certainly has happened before in DC. So I think that remains a real possibility. And then I just put 5 there, because we really just don't know. And right now it's very hard to chart a path. All of these are possible outcomes, but the reality is probably going to end up being some combination of all 4. Where we have a shutdown for a day that forces a continuing resolution. The Republicans move, 5 of the bills in regular order and then wrap the last 4 into a minibus, as they call it. And then we end up with some sort of grand bargain at the end of the day. So it's frustrating. It's particularly frustrating when you're looking at, funding of specific programs. As we're about to get into, there are still some major differences between the House and Senate on programs such as AmeriCorps that we, are focused on, federal work study that Scott has mentioned. So, how those differences get resolved all are tied up into how the logistics and the legislative process moves as well, because there's a big difference between them punting completely and saying, we cannot get it together. We're just going to pass a year-long continuing resolution at, 1% less than last year. Now, if you're worried about, if you think the House bill is the worst thing in the world, that might be better than the reality. But if you think the Senate is the minimum of where we should be, that's not good. That's not particularly good news. So anyway, I apologize, because I know that's hardly a definitive answer to where do we go from here, but I thought it would be helpful for you to just sort of get a sense of the state of play and see what the various possibilities are. So I think, Scott, unless you have anything to add to that, I think we're going to jump now into sort of some specific issues around the civic and community engagement world.
So we wanted to put this up here because it kind of illustrates in a real sense the political tug of war going on behind the scenes. If you look at And these numbers are reflecting what's in the Senate and what's in the House bills for FY24 for these two programs. Now, certainly a difference on AmeriCorps. I think the Senate number is, not what the administration asked for FY24, and it's a little bit of a haircut. And the House is a much lower number, but it's still at least funded. And to a degree, that the House number reflects, even though there was this agreement, there was this push from a very strong conservative group within that we've got to do more, and the chair of the Appropriations Committee acquiesced to that pressure. It was even more so, as you see, in the federal work-study program. Obviously, in the House, that's a heck of a lot more than a haircut. They're beginning to look like me. But it would be a mistake to interpret that as a reflection necessarily on how the majority of the Republicans in the House view the federal work-study program. Those of us who are looking at advocacy were like, oh my God, nobody likes that program. That was an indiscriminate cut. The same bill, the same education account, zeroed out or did cut 80% of the funds for Title I for K through 12. 80% money that goes primarily to the low-income serving school districts across the country. They also, and doesn't reflect their level of lack of support for that either. It's just demonstrating that they wanted to send a very strong message about getting serious about spending, and they exerted indiscriminate cuts. So I wouldn't, on the one hand, we need to be alarmed by that. On the other hand, it does not reflect how the majority of Republicans actually view the work-study program. We would just add kind of on the status of authorizations of other legislation, since time is running out just in terms of the calendar of the year. We would not expect to see any other bills like, there have been some bills introduced to focus on civics, civics for democracy, or to focus on curriculum, civics in the curriculum. Those aren't going to see the light of day before the end of this calendar year. And they likely wouldn't get serious entertainment until Congress agrees to take up reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, which the chairwoman of the committee in the House would love to do, Chairwoman Fox, in the next session of this Congress. But there are many on our side of the advocacy world that the last thing we'd like to see is Chairwoman Fox move a higher ed reauthorization bill, because we'd be crazy about what some of the riders and provisions could be in that bill. So in any event, we wanted to give you some sense of just how confusing the situation is right now. And hopefully we did that. Now we're happy to talk a little bit about advocacy, but more importantly, to take questions and to learn more from you about issues you'd like to hear about on future calls together.
Yeah, and I think Bobby just put a note in the chat, just highlighting if you have questions. We're just about to wrap up here our presentation, but feel free to put them in chat, or we'll we'll look for raised hands in just a moment. Wanted to, just before we get that, just to put this out here, looking at next year, there is a lot of challenges ahead in the funding space for really any programs. The budget is going to be under a tremendous amount of stress. The debt and the deficit, especially with the way interest rates have risen, has become a real increasing concern. Interest on the debt is now one of the largest outlays the federal government has. This could have impact on things like earmarks, or community projects, whatever you want to call them, as Congress is looking for ways to try and trim its spending. The counter to that is that earmarks tend to be the grease that gets things done on some of these bills, but I raise that. The presidential election cycle, has already kicked into gear, but beginning next year, that is a full-time obsession, and that will take a lot of the wind out of the sails for what Congress is working on. We still have very narrow majorities in the House and the Senate, so getting consensus is the only way something's going to move. At a time when consensus is almost become a dirty word up there. And then obviously a big question mark is, what's going to happen in the Middle East, and, how wide a conflict is this, could this possibly be, and what are the implications for, everything for foreign aid to the price of gas here in the United States. So a lot of question marks going into the next year. Doesn't mean that our advocacy should shift or change. Except to say that it's possible that we are looking to play a little more defense and a little less offense compared to the previous 3 years when we had, the IRA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS and Science Bill, and a lot of that money is still cycling out. But the appropriations process, the annual appropriations process, is now under a lot of stress. And then I think, Scott, we were going to wrap up with this and then take some questions.
So in thinking about engaging both for fiscal year 24, but looking ahead to 25, many of you are in organizations that have great governmental relations office and team, and we know many of them. We work closely with them. We would encourage you to do the same, but also to reach out directly to Bobby and then to us, and we can give you suggestions on, where's the best, what's the best letter to lend your voice on, or what's the best way to articulate, or what members are champions of some of the particular issues that you care about. We can help narrow that down. We've already, we were on a call earlier today with Bobby and the Coalition for Service Learning to talk about collaboration on advocacy. We have on here community projects. One of the things to keep in mind in the speaker's race, Scalise supported community project funds. He brought home several community project funds for nonprofits in his congressional district. If he were the ultimately successful speaker, I suspect, unless he's under just a tremendous amount of pressure, but I would suspect that he would want that to continue. And this is an area where many of the organizations on this call might be able to find some opportunity to fund a community-oriented, a community-based program. Those are things we can certainly talk about. I think that's it. I mean, I guess I would just wrap by saying, yes, chaos, but a couple of things to keep in mind. I don't think this House of Representatives can afford, with the pressure coming out of the Middle East right now, that this House can afford for there to be a shutdown. So I am going to put money on the table that there won't be. I'm not sure I'm going to go out and buy a lottery ticket tonight, but And whether we have a continuing resolution for the remainder of FY24 or an omnibus budget remains to be seen, but there's a very important distinction between the two. A continuing resolution would mean that basically everything would get funded as is for FY23. Everything would look for FY24 just as it does now. If we did an omnibus, it could be, new programs. It could be a lot of cuts in O programs. It could actually be a little bit more of a risky situation for many of the existing programs that fund activities that support your efforts. So with that, we are happy to turn it to questions. And Bill, are you going to figure out what those are?
Let me start by stopping sharing my the screen here so that we can see folks that might want to raise their hands, or I don't know, Bobby, if you can see folks raising their hands. Otherwise, I think we had a couple questions that popped up in chat where we can certainly start there. Just looking to go back to the top here so I don't miss anybody. Somebody is asking, supporting students with basic needs, food and housing, is a larger part of our community engagement. Any forecast or insights on those types of programs, or are they just wrapped into the same budget challenges that the rest of the programs are wrapped into?
I'd be happy to take the first crack at that, Bill. Despite all of the sense of partisanship that you hear coming out of Washington and all of the pressure on the budget, I would say that there is a lot of bipartisan recognition of the housing issue that's growing in this country across many demographics and particularly students. There is for example, a foster care caucus in the House that is focused on some of the particular challenges that students as they age out of foster care face. And you may have seen a recent announcement out of the HUD to try to increase the allowance for foster kids in housing. So I think there is some recognition on both sides of the aisle, but recognition of the problem and funding of the problem are two separate issues. And I think that's where groups like this become really important, lending your voice to this issue can help establish some funding in the next Congress. The issue of food, we're going through a reauthorization of the Farm Bill. And this discussion is becoming very active in the Farm Bill discussion about, like, for example, food stamp eligibility for students. So yes, I mean, even despite all these thunderclouds, there is a lot of bipartisan support for issues like this.
Yeah, nothing to add to that. I think that you hit it on the nose, Scott. Somebody in the chat asked for more details about how to advocate for and the process for community projects. And I know Bobby put into the chat a link to a hour-long session that I was pleased to participate in with a couple other folks that have been successful in securing community projects. So I would point you to that. It's and then if there's a specific question about the challenges there, but reaching out to your member early and having a well thought out project and budget now or by January is really the key first step there.
And I might just add just a couple of basics on this. And again, sure. if you're at an institution where you have a governmental relations representative, you'll you'll want to talk to them, because I'm sure there are probably a lot of different ideas being thought about. But in general, you need to know the following. The House has a set of rules for community project funds, and there are certain agencies where you can get the money. The Senate has a whole different set of rules and a different set of agencies. So what might work in the House doesn't necessarily work in the Senate, and vice versa. And some members participate, some members don't. For example, the two senators from the state of Texas don't earmark. Senators from Maine do. House, it's all across the board. But we can help you through Bobby sort through all of that.
Next question I see is, with elections next year, where do you see momentum for education and funding issues, student debt, students with disabilities, Title I? I'll take a quick first crack at that, Scott, and then jump in. But because I really, education is going to be probably one of the starkest contrast issues in the presidential election next year that you're going to see. I think, let's just, for the sake of fun and argument, assume that it's going to be a Biden-Trump rematch. I think that, President Biden, he's going to see that as an opportunity. Democrats are trying to recapture education as an issue that has been a winner for them over the years. He obviously has tried to do a number of different things around student debt. So I think there's a lot of questions around the value of higher education, looking at the college and university scope. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and you're going to hear a lot from the Biden campaign around education and the opportunities it provides. In contrast, I think you're going to see a desire to, at the far end of the spectrum, just eliminate the Department of Education as a way to shrink the federal government. And moving a little closer back towards current state, a continued effort to cut more and more programs out of that area. So really expect that one to be sort of a flashpoint of distinction between the two platforms of the presidential race. I know, Scott, if you...
I think you summed it up perfectly.
And that's not even getting into some of the culture wars around the issue. So let's see.
Doug has asked an interesting question here. Is there an argument for supporting higher ed community engagement that resonates with House Republicans? We are searching for such an argument right now. That is a key question that we are beginning to explore with moderate Republicans who we know, like, for example, we've been engaging with the co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House. And that is a group of members from both sides of the aisle who take civic engagement, who believe it is important, and also recognize the role that universities play in their own communities. We are beginning to dialogue with them on how to dialogue with other members of Congress to where they will actually, vote with their fingers the way they maybe talk with their mouth. So Doug, I would say stay tuned. We hope on future calls to have more data related to that very important question.
Yeah, I think, agree with everything Scott just said. I think some tentative forays, on the Republican side that have some resonance are ones that are really economic development type focused. A lot of universities are the largest employers in a congressional district. A lot of universities are spending a lot of time and energy around being hubs of economic activity for the region and creating new firms, new jobs, things like that. And, community engagement is obviously a big piece of that. So those it's not a complete answer, and I agree with Scott's perspective, but I think those are the arguments that tend to be a little more politics is local focused, and sort of get you away from some of these bigger picture sort of, is higher education just, a bastion of liberalism and, totally disengaged.
Yeah, and I would take it and just even a little finer point on this excellent question. I was with the university president recently visiting with a senator from this president's state. And the president was talking about how he had been going around the community talking to, local bank presidents, local executive directors of different programs, saying, what do you need from our students? What do you need? And so the president was learning a lot about, job skills that they're looking for. What the senator heard was that this university was really trying to hone in on the community and hone in on talking to the local leadership and trying to match, to the degree possible, the curriculum, the training with the need out there. And so that was showing, because, for better or worse, we have this reputation, we in higher ed, of being, a little tone deaf, particularly to our and having town gown issues. This really demonstrated a president who was, had awareness, sensitive to that, and you all practice this, it. I think that's a helpful way to engage some Republican members as well.
If I could just add to that, I think, something I wanted to share with the community that I've had a lot of conversations with Scott and Bill about is, how do we have this multifaceted approach? Historically in the field, and a lot of folks on this call I know have been heavily invested in advancing things like Learn and Serve and these kind of core programs that were at the federal level that provided real capacity and key infrastructure to advance our work. And those things are things that we're exploring as Scott and Bill said, we just got off the phone with some, incredible folks who many names that this community would know from the Coalition of Service Learning to think about how do we join efforts to advance that cause and those priorities. But the other path that we're really trying to advance that is a little bit more nuanced and kind of to your point, Doug, is how do we focus more on issue areas that are of importance from a bipartisan perspective, that are challenges in our community, and repositioning higher education as an essential part of the solution through community engagement. And I think that's going to take some work, and that's part of kind of making this kind of long investment in advancing this work at Compact standpoint and having some folks like Bill and Scott with us. But I just want to note, that's a piece of how to think about it too, is to look at it what's the lead, right? Is it community engagement, and how do we fund that, and how do we advance that? Or is it, how do we really kind of orient ourselves around the issues and challenges that our society and communities are facing, and coming in from a perspective of saying higher education should have a seat at this table. And those are the kinds of places when we talk about the foster care caucus, the problem solvers caucus, that Scott and Bill, and the real opportunity to bring them on, that I think is going to open up new doors and new ways of thinking about our field and being in some different kinds of conversations.
Thanks, Bobby. So that we have two sort of related questions about sort of student-centered stories, early career folks, about how best to engage. And I think your story, the student story, is critically important, I guess is what I would say. It's really a persuasive advocacy technique on Capitol Hill. If you can take what can be an esoteric issue and bring it down to a personal experience that you can share. Obviously, it's ideal, it's great if it has applicability beyond your own personal circumstance, but I think student stories are fantastic and a really valuable tool in the toolbox for advocacy. So I would commend you to tell your story, to engage with your members of Congress at any opportunity you have. we're not hiring to respond to the first question up there, but we'll happy to take your resume. So
students make great advocates. I've never met a member of Congress who turns down an opportunity to have a photograph with students. And we're happy to, there's some do's and don'ts of the road, and what works well and what doesn't. And we're happy to have those conversations, but it's not only a great learning experience, but they are truly passionate advocates and good, examples of, the seeing the investment in the taxpayer money and what they're getting for it.
Absolutely. I think we've knocked out the chat questions. I don't know if anyone else has somebody wanting to take you up on your offer there, Scott, for the do's and don'ts.
Okay.
Any other questions from the group?
Now, another question I would ask is if people have ideas of what they'd like to see us talk about in future ones, if there are specific issues you'd love for us to be kind of leaning more into. I think, Shannon, your question around particularly the basic needs element could be like really trying to uncover more of those kind of policy and practice areas in that space. But are there other things that folks would love to kind of think about how these briefings could be most helpful to them?
Yeah, that would be we would be excited to address those topics and to find colleagues who could as well. So.
And Trina, that's a great question. Trina, a longtime leader in our field who's now with Peace Corps, was asking if we have kind of a standalone advocacy page. We do not. I literally just messaged our communications person when this started and said, we're going to have to figure out where to put these recordings. So this is a good reason to start something. But again, this is relatively new work for us. So excited about where this is going to go.
We appreciate all of your time today and your engagement, and we look forward to hearing from you.